Good morning and peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Living in the Most Serious Times. I am your host, Ibrahim El-Amin, and I am joined by my co-host, Faridah Abdul-Tawwab Brown. We want to welcome you to this episode, Sunday, May 10th, 2026. We have a very special program for you today. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Faridah. I think your mic is still muted.
Alaikum assalam. How are you this morning? Glorious.
I'm doing very well. Praise be to Allah. And happy Mother's Day.
Thank you.
To you as well as to all of our listening audience, whether you're watching live or joining us at a later date and watching the recorded version of this program. We have a very special program for you today, in which we have some, very important and wide-ranging discussion. We have a special guest, Councilwoman Amina Bey of Newark, New Jersey. She is running for re-election to the Central Ward, an election that will take place just a couple of short days from now. So she'll be joining us in just a second. Later on, Sister Farah and I will have a conversation regarding some very important news items of the day. And of course, we will continue with our ongoing discussion with Muslim American leader Imam Earl Abdul Malik Muhammad. Before we get into the substance of the conversations today, we just want to make you aware that upcoming we have the annual Muslim American Independence Day address taking place in Rochester, New York, the historic home of the great Frederick Douglass. The program will take place July 11th, 2026 at the Memorial Art Gallery. This is a program that stands in recognition of America's Declaration of Independence, but also of Mr. Douglass's well-known and well-regarded and well-remembered speech, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July?" So at once we are recognizing America's determined and principled interest in freedom, justice, but at the same time recognizing the efforts of those who were denied those freedoms and their imploring of America to live up to her highest ideals. So we're looking forward to a very special program. As you're aware, this is the 250th anniversary of America's independence. So we hope that you'll join us there in the city of Rochester to mark this great event. So we'll bring Councilwoman Amina Bey in right now. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, hold on one second. There we go. Your mic was muted just a second. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay. Well, alaikum assalam. How are you today?
We're doing very well. It's good to see you again. The last time we had you on the program, I was very well received. You're obviously much closer to the big day, election day. I imagine that you're quite busy. So if you could just, tell us how you feel, tell us how things are going. And as I said, I'm sure that you're quite busy. But just give us a peek behind the curtain in terms of what's going on with the campaign, if you will.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I appreciate the invitation back. Happy Mother's Day, my beautiful sister, and all the mothers out there, and especially to my mother, Frederica Bey, Haja Frederica Bey. Happy Mother's Day, Mommy. Yes, I apologize that I'm in the car because I'm on the move. We have Election Day on Tuesday, May 12th, inshallah. I'm looking forward to celebrating a victory. I want to thank you and really the entire Muslim community for getting me my first victory, because the Muslim community came out overwhelmingly in support of my candidacy for Central Ward Council. That was the highest, voting surge in the Muslim community in the city of Newark in decades. And I appreciate the love and support, the prayers. It's been a long journey. I started this journey in May 2024 with the special election. And so now we're in, May 2026. So 2 years is a long time to be running for office. I've been in office for 5 months. It's been a lot. It's been very educational. It's been very moving. It's been exhausting. But it's also been very inspiring. Allah has been so merciful. He has surrounded me with a team of people who have been so supportive and so loving and so nurturing. It's really it's been a great experience. It's been a lot though, managing the expectations of people, and really helping to educate the public on what exactly my role and responsibility is, but also helping them regain their faith and trust in the political process and in elected officials, because there's been a lot of apathy in the community in general, just because of so many things going on, nationwide. We know what's been happening with the attack on our freedoms and our democracy and on our people. And so people have just really been feeling beat down and unheard and unseen. So it's been a lot of extra effort to energize the base and get people back out and involved and engaged civically. So, but it's been good though. It's been a good learning learning experience for me.
The last time that you were on, that was a point of discussion that we had. The sense of apathy that oftentimes affects voters, and perhaps it is more pronounced among certain different demographics. And in particular, sometimes the local elections are not given the level of we don't approach them with the level of seriousness that we eagerness that we sometimes do with the presidential elections and some of the regional elections, statewide and so forth. But in many respects, they affect us more than or more intimately than some of those bigger or more high-profile elections. Have you seen a change in the campaign that you've done these last few weeks, a shift in more curiosity and a more engaged mentality from the voters and sentiment from the voters, especially given what you mentioned with regard to the recent Supreme Court decisions that have impacted voting rights here in the United States?
Absolutely, especially among our younger demographic, just really around educating people around the fact that all politics are local. It starts at the local level, and that you hear people say all the time, "I don't do politics. I don't do politics." Politics, it determines how much you pay in rent. Politics determine how much you pay for groceries. Politics determine how much you pay in tuition. It determines everything. And so to be involved and to be engaged when people complain about the high cost of rent, and not being able to find a sustainable job in their neighborhood, all of that is because of the politics in your local area. And you must be engaged, and you must be aware, and you must be educated, and really involved in selecting people who are going to fight for your interests locally at home before you even get to the state house or Washington.
I'd like to follow up that inquiry and that discussion. You mentioned the young people, and I know that for in many locales, and Newark is no exception, there is a current, I believe, a generational divide that sometimes is exploited by candidates, by different parties, and even by our media. And so, I'd like you to speak a bit to how your campaign, and I know that you've only been in office for 5 months. It's not a lot of time. You did say that you're on a slight learning curve, and so there are a lot of things that are informing your current campaign that you've learned over the past 5 months. But could you speak a bit to the role, particularly as we acknowledged at the top of the show, this is Mother's Day. there is, I believe, a nurturing element that women, if we tap into it, we can bring into whatever positions that we are holding in our society. So could you mention a little bit about how your campaign, about how you as a candidate, Amina Bey, might serve to heal those generational divides and speak to young people about what your candidacy can do for them and the wisdom and experience inherent in your position?
Well, one of the first things that we did once we took office is that we established council member for the day. And what we done, we have engaged over 400 students. We go to different schools and invite students to City Hall. We provide a civics class for them right in City Hall, right in our office. We tour them around, they sit in on a council meeting, and we educate them on how to be involved in their community, because it's about empowerment, and so what we've done, and unintentionally, but sometimes as adults we forget that we must empower young people and make sure that they understand that they have a voice and a choice all of their own, and that they have the intelligence and the wherewithal to make decisions for themselves, and we have to prepare them for that. And so in our effort to try to protect them, we really disenfranchise them. And so we have to put the power back in their hands and make space for them at the table. And so that's what we have done through our council member for the day. And then also we've held several community meetings and go to where the young people are, especially the young creatives, because everyone is not in college. Some people are out just trying to make a living. They're trying to, build something on their own, young entrepreneurs, and really engage them and to give them information on the tools and the information that will help them build their business, to start their own, open their store, and to create the art that they want to create, and write the books that they want to write, and to get the jobs that they want to get, and go to grad school and to teach and to tutor and do all of the things, and bring them in, not just go and drop some literature, but actually sit down with them and talk to them about what they want to do, and give them the information on how they can go about doing it, and then provide them the support, because they need to know that they have a support system around them, and make sure that they know that we are part of their village. And so when people feel seen and heard, they're more likely to lean into what is that you're trying to provide for them. And so that's where that mothering and that nurturing, and it's, sometimes it come off a little auntie vibe, but but it makes sure that they know and understand that they are a part of this process, that they are part of the community. And we need to remember that, because sometimes we have a tendency to shut young people out, and act as if they don't have a voice, and what they have to say and what they want is unimportant, and that's how we lose them. And so we have to be accountable for how we have dropped the ball, and we have a responsibility to pick it back up and make sure that we engage in a meaningful and intentional way.
It's been reported quite a bit in the news that there has been some significant shifts in attitudes amongst young people, particularly regarding some international issues that spell a marked shift in the attitude of Americans with regard to these issues. In terms of dealing with the young people there in Newark, the young voters there in Newark, perhaps they're not necessarily of the voting age yet, but they might be within a year. Have you noticed any shifts in concerns, or just new concerns that they are bringing to the table or expressing to you that perhaps previous generations might not have been as sensitive to?
Oh, absolutely. Because our young people, this is the age of instant information, and so they get most of their information off of Instagram and TikTok, and on social media. They don't watch the traditional news, as we did or our parents did. They don't read the newspaper as we did or our parents did. And so they get information, and it may or may not be filtered. It may or may not be totally true. And so when we speak to them, we need to make sure that we have accurate information. We need to have facts. And then we also need to make sure that we see it from the different perspectives that they do. So like in the city of Newark, we've passed an ordinance a couple of years ago that allows 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in the school board election, only in the school board election. But because we have taken civics basically out of school, they're not educated as to what that really means. And so when we're talking to young people, even the younger ones in their 20s and even their early 30s, sometimes we have to start from scratch when we talk about what it means to be politically active, what it means to vote on things here that affect us, you know, across the globe, the things that are happening across, you know, how you have one person who can literally start a war that affects the entire, you know, the entire world, for whatever reason, and how that comes to be, and what, you know, the powers that the president has, and the powers that Congress have, and the powers that, you know, local officials have, and really break down what government is and how it works. Because the information can be skewed in so many different ways on social media, you have to really be intentional about how you explain things and make sure that you bring facts, because we assume that young people don't know anything, and they do, but it's just sometimes the information is, you know, gets filtered in a different way. And so we have to be up on things. We have to make sure that, you know, we have certain information, because they're getting it faster than we can, you know, even think about. And so what we want to talk about today, they've already talked about yesterday. You know, they're already past it. So we it's a lot to keep up with, but we really have to stay plugged in. We cannot afford to ignore the voices and the thoughts and the needs of our young people. We just really can't. We can't afford to ignore them.
So you're muted, Ibrahim.
I'm sorry about that. But I was just saying, as somebody that was a teacher for a little while, I can attest to that. You know, I was being fact checked as we were in class. You know, everything
Yes.
you say, you're Googling, and sometimes the answers was like, okay, you're showing me something I don't know. And then in other cases, it was completely off.
You know, I'd like to follow up that question about the young people, because often the young people represent the spirit of a community, that eagerness for life, that ability to see what is right, or perceive what is right or wrong, and then to have an urge to act immediately upon it. So I wanted to bring your attention, you know, to an issue that I know has been concerning the residents of Newark for a while. And I wanted to get your take on your campaign and how you and your team are addressing the sensitivities that exist within Newark, particularly around police accountability, the shooting of Yusuf Bey. And I wanted to know, as a Central Ward candidate and as the councilwoman from the Central Ward, that's the heartbeat of the city. It's the literal heart and center of the city. And so how would you speak right now to constituents in the last, you know, in the run up to the election, about what your campaign presents, what your candidacy presents as a way forward to address these very sensitive matters that agitate particularly the hearts of our young people? What would you say to them in terms of providing accurate information that balances wisdom with speaking to the needs of the people to have their sensitivities addressed?
That's an excellent question. It is really, it's something, it's unfortunate that it's not new, that this is not a new discussion. This is not a new issue. When we talk about police accountability, when we talk about protect and serve, the fact of the matter is that we need to get back to community policing. And when I say community policing, meaning that that we have officers who are from the neighborhood, that live in the neighborhood, that are accountable to the people in the neighborhood, because you have a different level of respect for the people when you live next to them, when you can see them in the supermarket, when you see them walking down the street, when you are engaged and you are the neighbor. You are not going to treat people as if you are you know, that as if you're some type of guard or overseer. There has to be real engagement, and that's one of the things that I will say that Mayor Baraka has worked very hard towards with the police department, bringing in also social workers, creating the Office of Violence Prevention, doing intervention and bringing people from the community into the police department who are social workers, who are interventionists, who are community leaders, who are, you know, former incarcerated, who have turned their lives around and know the different hotspots and know the trends, but also to be able to rebuild trust in the community, to make sure that the residents know and understand that the police are there to serve them, to protect them, not to be aggressors on them, and also making sure that there's proper accountability and responsibility held if someone does step out of line, if they do overreach, if they do overstep, if there is a break in protocol, because all lives are precious. You know, people, every time that there's an incident with a police officer or a resident, the first things people want to do is they want to dig into the background of the afflicted, of the injured party, of the person who was either, you know, assaulted or killed, and want to say, you know, go into their background where they weren't the, you know, the best kid, and they used to hang on the block. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. A life is a life is a life, and all life must be protected, all life must be cherished, all life must be cared for, and we have a responsibility to make sure that our community knows that we love and care for them, and that everything that happens in this city should be for their benefit, never for their detriment, and that includes police protection.
I'm so happy. Before I pass off the next question to Imam Ibrahim, I just want to say that what you ended that with, I think, is something that all the residents of Newark can get behind, and that is the sacredness and the sanctity of human life and the dignity of human life. And it sounds like your campaign and your candidacy, that's a central feature, as it should be for all residents of Newark. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, going off of the answer that you gave to Sister Faridah's question, the concern for human life, the respect for human life. You know, Newark was definite, and Mayor Baraka was in the news as it relates to the issue of immigration not too long ago. And while there have been instances of loss of life, the main issue is not only just the preservation of life in terms of someone living, but the respect that is accorded to them as a dignified human being, and the human dignity that should be offered to them regardless of their particular national origin or status as it relates to citizenship, the rights of immigrants. Because of certain things that are happening in the news, perhaps this issue has stepped back a little, or faded back a little bit in the consciousness of the public. What has been your sense of where the citizens of Newark are in terms of this being an issue, an important issue? Where is it ranking right now as you head toward Tuesday?
Actually, is ranking fairly high, which is I'm gonna be honest with you, it's a little disturbing to me the way that it's ranking. And what I mean by that is that we as African Americans in America, we as people of the African diaspora, we as Muslims, we know what it feels like to be oppressed. We know what it feels like to be subjugated. We know we have a long tortured history in this country, you know, based on our race, based on our religion, our faith, our gender, women, and to have our own people to speak so violently against other people because they weren't born here, because someone has convinced them that something that they have is going to be taken away and given to other people. You know, it's falling into the whole divide and conquer, you know, the trap of, you know, well, I can't convince you to be on my side, so I'm going to convince you to be against these people over here, and to steer you away from other issues that affect you personally and specifically. The fact of the matter is that Mayor Raz J. Baraka has said very clearly, every resident in the city of Newark deserves my respect, my protection, and my attention, period. So that's all that is. He is being the mayor for all of Newark, and so it's not about taking something away from one person and giving it to another. It's about making sure that the rights that we all have as human beings are protected, and that it's not, that we don't allow these people to come through our communities like slave catchers and snatch people up and take them away and separate them from their children and their families with no recourse, with no regard, and so that becomes an issue. And the fact that we have our own people that are really, vilifying him for this, it disturbs me. But these are the same people that when we celebrated, Muslim Heritage Month in January, and raised the Muslim flag and had a whole ceremony at City Hall, I received death threats from the same people who are talking about the immigration issue and everything, because how dare I celebrate being a Muslim? How dare I say that I am proud to be a Muslim in America? How dare I say that I am proud to be a Black woman who is a Muslim, and raise up the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in City Hall? And so vilified, we received death threats. It was a whole thing. And these are the same voices. So we have to be careful of where we align ourselves when we talk against other, Black and brown people and people of color and people who are considered minorities, immigrants, migrants, and have been subjugated and oppressed and being suppressed. We cannot we cannot align ourselves with that. We have to be very, very careful with that.
Thank you. I was having this conversation with someone recently along these lines, and California, from Southern California, and historically there have been some very unfortunate and negative experiences between African American and Hispanic communities, Latino communities, and the relationship is strained. And I've heard increasingly amongst younger people too, an attitude that you would have thought very, very unusual coming from African Americans. But I find that, or at least, and I'm curious if you found this to be the same, it tends to be people who are younger and perhaps some distance away from particular struggles that our people have had. It's more of a historic reference for them as opposed to something lived. And perhaps they're not, as conscious or as informed about, what our historical struggles have been and what it has taken for us to get here at this point. Have you noticed that as with regard to this issue?
Actually, I've noticed the opposite. I've noticed not necessarily younger people, but I would say middle-aged to older people who are old enough to remember the inner workings and the collaboration between the Black Panther Party and the Young Lords. Here in this area, to remember the Black and Puerto Rican convention that helped usher in Mayor Kenneth A. Gibson, the first Black mayor of Newark and another major northeastern city. The coming together of Black and brown people in this country to create a social economic system that allowed us to rise in political and social economic power, and to now have our same, some of these same people who witnessed it as younger people or who grew up in it, or some even who participated in it, or to have their children or grandchildren now to talk about us and them type of dynamic. It just makes me realize how much we allowed the oppressor to get in between us, because the divide and conquer is real. And so if I can separate you, because I understand and I know your power, I know your collective power, but if I can turn you against each other and separate you and have you working at opposite ends of the spectrum and working against each other, you can kill each other and I can sit back and watch, and I don't have to get my hands dirty. And that's what's been happening. And literally, we have the enemy watching us take each other out. And for what? We're fighting against each other for what? And we're fighting for crumbs at the table, while the people who are creating this fight amongst us are building wealth for generations. And we're still here trying to figure out how we're going to pay for eggs and milk. I don't understand.
You know, I would just like to.
We know that you're on the. Oh, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to bring this back full circle. I know that your time is limited with us, Councilwoman, but I'd just like to go back to something you said earlier when asked about your campaign and your campaign's response to the real needs and sensitivities of the people in the city, and that is to center human dignity, the sanctity of human life. And as you said, that this conversation and this movement to exploit and divide humanity is one that is as old as the creation of humanity. That by the enemy of mankind. And so to bring this back full circle to what your campaign and your candidacy promises, it sounds to me, and I'll leave the last word to you, that you are highlighting and emphasizing and promoting human dignity for all residents of Newark.
Absolutely, and it's all about the unification of the family, unification of the community. We have to work together. It's as simple as that. I mean, we're going to thrive together or we're going to die separately. And we need to know and understand that Allah made us in nations and tribes so we can learn from one another and grow together, and not that we would despise each other and work against each other. And so if we remember that and we stay true to his word, we will continue to be successful and move our community and our people forward.
Thank you. We could not have ended on a better note.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And to all of the mothers who are watching us, happy Mother's Day. And here, Imam is back with us.
Yes, happy Mother's Day, and please, May 12th, please come out and vote, Newark, New Jersey. Yes. May 12th, yes. Amina Bey for Central Ward Council, C1.
Okay, thank you.
You heard it.
And you're in our prayers.
Thank you.
And our hopes. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much. Wa alaikum assalam.
And we'll be right back with an ongoing conversation. Assalamu alaikum again to our listening audience. That was Councilwoman Amina Bey running for the Central Ward, or running for the council seat, re-election to the council in Central Ward of Newark, New Jersey. Historic city there, here in the United States. Historic for many reasons. We have a special affinity for it as Muslim African Americans. Its role and its history in terms of our social development can't be understated, or I should say overstated. Lot to discuss in the news before we get to the other segment in our program. Also, too, we would like to take this time to make our audience aware that if you do have questions that you would like to submit to the program, please do so. You can reach us by visiting MuslimAmericanMinistry.com. You can click on the contact link and submit your question there. Just make sure that you place in the subject living in the most serious times. And we want that the conversation here includes you, that you not just be merely a spectator if there is a particular concern that you want to express. So we have a few things that we would like to discuss today. I'll turn it over to you, Sister Faridah.
You know, I am really excited coming off of that conversation and that discussion with Councilwoman Bey. And while Newark is on the mind, I'd like to pose a question to you. And I'm going to ask this question in the context of a 2008 Savior's Day address by Imam Warithuddin Muhammad, the late leader of the Muslim American community, and who was very much, you mentioned the importance of Newark to African Americans, to America in general, and to the African American Muslim community in particular. And one of the things that Imam Muhammad addressed, and this is not limited to the Muslim community, but he addressed the condition of virility for the African American community. And virility, of course, being the energy and the potency of a community, and it's very much associated with malehood, with manhood, with masculinity. This principle, and so in light of some of the issues that came up in discussion with Councilwoman Bey, and also acknowledging the role. This is Mother's Day, but acknowledging the role of men as fathers, as leaders, as protectors and maintainers of community life. There was a recent brothers meeting in Newark, New Jersey. And in light of this concept of virility that our late leader told us to really reflect on, importantly, would you be able to give us anything that you can share with us that came about as a result of that meeting, why it was called, and what we might take from that, and what you might share with us in light of the virility of community life for African Americans?
Yes, the concept of is a tradition of ours. They were conducted during Imam W.D. Muhammad's lifetime, brothers and sisters meetings. The concerns addressed in them are universal. And it isn't in any way kind of associated with some of the trends that we see in the West here in terms of the relationship between males and females. It isn't associated with that at all. But provides an environment in which the dignity of both the male and the female is respected in light of particular responsibilities that they have to serve the universal good. And even before Imam W.D. Muhammad was leader of the community, you could say that perhaps preceding these meetings, these types of meetings, there was obviously the fruit of Islam and the MGT within the Nation of Islam structure. So this is a tradition of ours, and for as a result of concern to express. I don't know if I'm going in and out. I think I might be going in and out. Having a little bit of okay, there. I'm having a little bit of issues with my internet connection this morning, so I appreciate you all's patience. But this tradition of ours, and the concern to have a brothers meeting was brought to our office, the office of Imam Earl Abdul Malik Muhammad. We had one a number of years ago there in the city of Newark. And in fact, I believe that was our first meeting there. And the concern was brought that in light of a number of things, that it would be time that now would be the time to have another one. And so we organized it and put it together, and it's a very successful program. We had representation from all across the country, the West Coast, the South, the Midwest, and of course the East Coast. And really, the efforts of our supporters and the Muslim citizens there in Newark are to be commended. They're not operating just in the interest of their locale. They're operating with a concern for the health of our community, and in the context of its role in service to humanity. So they're to be commended, and we thank Allah and appreciate their continued support. In terms of what was discussed, you know, our unit, for anyone that is of a particular age, roughly about I would say, if you're in your 30s or 40s, you have a, for lack of a better term, a decline in a certain spirit, a certain vigor, and our sense of direction, our sense of unity, and moving toward a particular direction. And that decline is most dramatically present in the condition of our male. And it's something that it affects the whole community. But I believe that in the immediate in the setting immediately following Imam W.D. Muhammad's passing, certain ideas were prompted or put forward to nullify or to weaken the vigor of the community as a whole, and in particular the men who, if previous instances, in particular 1975, when Imam W.D. Muhammad became leader, because of internal forces in the community as well as external forces and natural role that males play, particular men associated with ensuring a transition from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's leadership to Imam W. Muhammad's leadership in a way to preserve the spiritual and social integrity of the community, despite some very dramatic changes in our understanding of our Islamic identity and our understanding of our human identity, really, because we had some very extreme ideas in terms of what we were as a created being. That commitment, that drive, that vigor was not present when Imam Muhammad passed, and there are a lot of reasons for it. And it would take, and I believe in time this will happen.
So while we wait for Imam Ibrahim's feed to return.
Back?
Yes.
Okay. In time, I believe that we will produce scientists, sociologists, psychologists that will document this in detail. And so what's needed now is some attention to rebuild or invigorating the community as a whole, really. It was just that in this particular setting, we were dealing specifically or had wanted to provide a space in which the men, the brothers, could particular attention could be given to them, and concerns that they might want to express to. So it was a very successful program. I'm not sure how many people are. Sort of last minute, we were given an invitation by the Imam of the Masjid Muhammad in Newark, Mujahideen Muhammad, and the Imam visited the mosque, and there was an interview conducted there. And we had the meeting and then a discussion period afterward. So it was very productive. I think that it's probably something that we'll do, every year. But the necessity of it is paramount in these particularly troubling times. You just as you can't have a productive, secure situation if the men are not sensitized to particular responsibilities, especially as it relates to the support for. And more than anything, I think that this meeting was focused on that, emphasizing that as a responsibility to the men.
Something you mentioned that sounds very, very heartening, and I am fortunate to be a member of a community that has prioritized that need and that recognized that need. One of the things that you said in terms of this scheme, if you will, that came about at the turn of leadership during the transition, is that the idea that's present throughout Scripture, and we remember it most frequently or most vividly in the story of Moses or Prophet Musa and the children of Israel and the Hebrews when they were in Egypt, and one of the what was conditions visited upon them was to kill the male children and to let the women live. And we can think about that very literally, or we can think about it in terms of the principle of leadership and how critical that is. If the principle of leadership is undermined in any significant way, then what you're going to find is the death of a people. And the decline that you mentioned at the opening of your statement is one that I believe is witnessed from within the community and from outside. And not only the Muslim American community, but it's reflected in the wider community of African Americans and Americans in general. And so it's very heartening to hear that this discussion is beginning and that you all will conduct regular meetings to emphasize this principle. And I'm hoping that more men join these brothers meetings, and that eventually the sisters meetings that happen simultaneously will bring us together to really form that whole community life that is supposed to inform our growth and our productivity. And you did mention, and I want to know if you mentioned the conversation that Imam Mujahideen Muhammad invited Imam Earl Abdul Malik Muhammad to participate there at Masjid Muhammad in Newark. And one of the conversations that came up during that interview was the idea of neighborhood community life. And that is something that I know that it's an issue, not only in the campaign, the election that will take place on May 12th there in Newark, regarding police accountability, community accountability, transparency at City Hall, and rebuilding trust, as she said, between the residents and the the leadership there in the city. But what I wanted to mention in the context before we move on to other points of conversation, before we leave the brothers discussion, you mentioned, as did Councilwoman Bey, the recent Supreme Court decisions that effectively gutted, to some extent, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the effect that that may have on African American voting rights. And one of the things that a parallel discussion that was mentioned by both you and the councilwoman is the level of apathy that exists within the electorate. There's a sense of defeatedness, and that this is across the nation, particularly among African American communities across the South, across the North, the East, the West, and the Midwest. And that is this idea that even though our voting rights were secured, that we were getting 18, 30, perhaps 35% of the voting registered voters were coming out to vote. And this reflects an extreme apathy or lack of concern or mistrust. So I'd like to know, to what extent was rebuilding trust a feature of any of the conversations or discussions in the brothers meeting? And if so, were there any points that you might be able to share with us that might be guiding principles for the community moving forward?
Yeah, the Bible. I mean, not just the Bible, but Scripture in general makes repeated references to family. We don't just look at that in terms of people being without food, but society being deprived of the essential nutrients to his life force being sustained. And the apathy that we're referring to, I think, extends from a starving of the spirit of the people. They're starved of leadership that they can.
The starving of leadership, I believe, was being addressed by Imam Ibrahim. And as he deals with some of his technical difficulties, we'll wait for him to.
I apologize for
Yes.
that. I'm sorry. I appreciate everyone's patience. But I was saying that people are starved of leadership that they can trust. They're starved of being properly informed as to what the purpose is of human life and what respect and considerations are due to it as a creation of God. They're starved of a sense of direction, proper direction for life that is consistent with the purpose for which it was created. So these things have been denied. And there are figures associated in Scripture, in particular Joseph, who are entrusted at particular points in time with the proper distribution of these resources, the just matriculation of ideas and correct understanding that supports the life. And we mentioned, the past of Imam W.D. Muhammad. You could see the parallel where we are in terms of the national body. I'm not referring to the Muslim community alone, but America as a whole. A war on leadership. Firstly, the argument, and I'll speak very frankly to this. Firstly, the argument that Imam Muhammad's leadership was not to be succeeded. That's the first step. The second step was to discredit anyone that could challenge that idea, that not only could articulate challenge properly or articulate an argument that would defeat it properly, but also had historic support coming directly from Imam W.D. Muhammad. And I believe that part of the reason why the invitation for the interview which preceded the brother was extended, and he expressed this in a way, Imam Mujahideen, was to address this assault on the bonds of trust in our community that have been assaulted and frayed in many ways. And when we look at America, we can see that the same is true. The trust in institutions that have previously served our lives, not just the government offices, the offices of leadership, but even education, the offices associated with education of not just young people, but adults. The whole conversation regarding higher education and costs associated with higher education, the systems that many, or you could say, have become oppressive, and other institutions. It's the interest of Muslims to establish, and the interest of Muslim leadership, it should be the interest of Muslim leadership to establish legitimate bonds of trust in the society. And this is a challenge for our community in particular, that if we, and I believe we meet the challenge and we overcome the challenge, it will be an example to the rest of the world, and will mark the beginning of a period of productivity in which the leadership of Muhammad the Prophet is reestablished in the world through this community.
That's a beautiful vision, and I believe that it will indeed come true. Something that you mentioned, and it really resonates in terms of this larger conversation, and it was part of our earlier discussion with the councilwoman, and that was the role and recognition. You mentioned it in the context of the brothers meeting, but it also came up earlier, and that is the recognition of the entitlements of the human being. Not because you belong to a particular nationality or ethnicity, but because you are a human being. There are certain respects and a dignity to which you are entitled, and to which all of humanity, leadership at least, is obligated to recognize. And you're describing a form of leadership that is represented by Muhammad the Prophet, prayers and peace be upon him, that if that form of leadership can be represented in our community, and then nationally and globally, that we may be in fact able to establish the just order. One of the things that I wanted to discuss is that this notion that the fraying of those bonds of trust, even the idea that we would disregard something so essential to our formation as a people, the sensitivity to struggle and oppression that obligated us to be in the forefront of the movement for justice, would somehow be sidetracked or forgotten by our people, in as much as they are vocal and violently, in her language, violently opposed to any care for our brothers and sisters who may happen to be immigrants. And in the same sense, in a larger sense, and when we're talking about, let's say, the geopolitical realities of our global community, we're looking at Sudan, we're looking at Congo, we're looking at Palestine, where the issue is most focused. And that is that this idea that the concern of humanity is not so much to which community you belong, but that there's a recognition that in the human being, there is a dignity that is inherent that must be respected by all of humanity, and particularly by leadership and governance. And so in that context, I know Imam Earl Abdul-Malik Muhammad has spoken into the public space time and time again, in the tradition of the leadership of Imam Warithuddin Muhammad, that those of us who were shaped as a new people, as an African-American Muslim people coming out of this tradition up from slavery, that our creation and formation in the crucible of American chattel slavery obligates us, particularly those of us who are blessed with guidance, this mercy from the Creator himself, with clear guidance, that it obligates us not just to speak for dignity on behalf of the African-American people, or of people who may look like us or reside in Africa or reside here, but that there is something essential in that formation as a new people that obligates us to speak to humanity at the vanguard of the movement for justice and the just order. And in that sense, the Imam Earl Abdul Malik Muhammad has spoken that I think there is a receptive audience, if you will, uh, among the oppressed people of the world themselves and among the diaspora that support them. There's a recognition if only we amplify that message. And I believe that amplifying that message, which we may not hear from the talking heads on CBS and CNN and in these other spaces, although if we are able to get into those spaces, I believe that we may that it will only be a help for mankind and a help for leadership around the world. But I do believe that it is a message that is that would be widely celebrated and promoted and uh, warmly received by the diasporas of all of these societies, Palestine, Congo, Sudan, where they find that their ultimate dignity has been denied and obliterated. And there are no people in the world who has had that singular experience of denial of everything that makes us essentially human than the African American people and that development. And so I think that there is I'll give you a chance to respond, but I think that there is a great opportunity for us to frame these various struggles that are, I think, distilled in the Palestinian experience, but that are happening all around the world, this denial of human dignity. I think that there is a real opportunity for our people to speak into that void and gather humanity under the banner of human dignity.
You said something that I think that if more of our people reflected on and gave serious thought to it, and I'm speaking of African Americans in general, that you wouldn't have the rise in this sort of certain attitudes, coarse attitudes toward these issues that you see becoming more and more vocalized by African American people or amongst African American people. And that is that all peoples, and if we look at history, have experienced some form of deprivation, political rights deprivation, and deprivation of economic access to economic resources. In the case of our experience, deprivation was universal. Everything that constituted proper human life, or the natural way in which human life develops, was systematically and diabolically stripped from us, down even the relationship that exists between members in a family. No respect for the family unit whatsoever. No respect for the institution of the relationship between parents and children, and husband and wife, even extended families. So the fact that our deprivation and the assault on us was not confined to just one aspect of our humanity, but was total, is an indication to us that our concern for freedom, justice, and equality, our concern that the proper respect for human purpose and dignity, which is the treasure of any society, our concern that it is properly and evenly distributed, is universal. It should be our universal concern. It shouldn't be enough for us that we have some access to the comforts that are afforded American citizenship, or afforded by American citizenship, access to.
So Imam Ibrahim will join us shortly. We apologize for the inconvenience.
Okay, afforded to us by access to because economic power. If that's the limit of our concern or the limit of our reach in terms of wanting to come out of what we came from and have some sense of restoration, if that's the limit of it, then you could make the argument in a sense that spiritually we're worse off now than we were back then, because we've divorced ourselves from the universal aspiration. So the Imam Muhammad, he named us Bilalian. And, people will, criticize and say, well, he put the term down. He removed your authorization for it, if that's your attitude. So you're not authorized to use the term. But Bilal, and this is, I think, something that Muslims in general should give more attention to, that something Bilal is just presented over the first muezzin, but he was the treasurer. He was responsible for the distribution of the community's treasure. That's something that was entrusted to him. So there's a parallel between him and Joseph in terms of ensuring that these vital treasures are evenly distributed amongst all parties in the society, all communities. So that's a designation for us as identity, and it has to be part of, we have to embrace it with vigor. And we have to work with a sense of determination that it will become a reality. We have to work with that sense of determination moving forward, no matter how distant it may seem from us given our present, circumstances. We both grew up in this community, and we've never had great wealth as a community. There was a display of that during the days of Islam, but when we went to the National Convention, we went to the Ramadan session, we had a very, very, very wealth sense of who we were. And that has been assaulted, and that has been warred on, and it has to be reconstituted. And reconstituted not in the sense of some sort of ethnic greatness or inflated tribal identity, but reconstituted as a matter of our obligation to serve Allah.
Thank you so much for your patience. Imam Ibrahim will be rejoining us shortly.
Okay, we're back. Okay.
Yes.
As a matter, we have to embrace it with a certain determination that bigger than just our immediate ethnic concerns, is what I'm saying, or immediate tribal concerns. It's a universal concern, a universal destiny to reestablish universal leadership for mankind on this planet.
This, what you've described is a vision that, as you stated earlier, we must have the determination to believe and to bring it into fruition. One of the things that you mentioned in that, I think, powerful statement of importance is that this is a sacred moral concern. And anything that is sacred and anything that is moral is inherently universal. And you ended on a note that I'd like us to discuss, and that is leadership for mankind. And I think that As you spoke about reconstitution, and you spoke about the parallels between Joseph and Bilal, those who had taken responsibility for the equal distribution of resources in the community or in the society, that was not respective of ethnic reality or specific membership, tribal membership, but of uh, the rights and the entitlements of the human being within society. And so, returning to this question of leadership and what constitutes it, you said that we need leadership for the world. And when you look at these different contexts, the conflagrations around the world, whether that's in Ukraine and Russia, whether that's in the Congo, whether that's in Sudan, whether some of us may be aware that there are societal there's a bubbling up of dissension in the society of South Africa with regard to immigrants coming in from other places across the continent, and it's truly beginning to disrupt the progress and the movement that they have been making with regard to the lack of equal distribution of resources. And so when we look at the situation that distills all of these concerns most greatly, and that is in Palestine, because the city of Jerusalem represents for mankind the sanctity of human potential is represented in this space, and it is sacred for all of humanity. Uh, there is a desire, a universal desire, that when one has been denied, whether it's in peace or universally, that it requisitions leadership and uh, responsibility for oneself as they're moving forward. And I think that one of the things that Imam Earl Abdul Malik Muhammad has pointed out for years, uh, particularly since October 7th of 2023, is the need for this type of sensitivity that you're describing, this Bilalian conceptualization, if you will, of the responsibility and the need for human leadership that is based in the sacred moral concern, that there is a need for support of the Palestinian uh, self-determination, to come up with its own inherent internal leadership that is based upon these concerns that you have described, that of distributing resources equally among the society, of acknowledging responsibility to the creator of this sacred concern, and of modeling that for all of humanity as they move out of this genocide and deprivation. So that is a responsibility that Imam Abdul Malik Muhammad has placed upon this community in particular, is that we are to find and support leadership concern, authentic leadership concern, as it is reflected in the principles that you just laid out so beautifully about the universal need for human leadership.
Yeah, we weren't intended to be a spectator community. Have your general, Islamic identity, make your 5 prayers, have your mosque, and come together for the Eid and perform, the rituals associated with Eid. Not that any of those things are not important; they're very important, and what they represent is very important. But we have an active role to play, and an important role. I should say, important might not. I would say integral role to play because of these. In part because of the integral role that America plays in the world. And the trouble in the Muslim world is not principally due to material superiority of the West or other societies, other centers of power in the world. It's not due to that. It's due to their neglect and their abandonment of the moral vision, as you expressed, the moral concern, and the embracing of logic that undresses you from your moral dignity. And Imam W. Muhammad said once that the Muslim world it has the Quran. They have hafiz and qaris of the Quran. People memorize the Quran, but what it had lost was Muhammad the Prophet. The Quran, and we know that well-known, well-respected, and well-verified report of Aisha that was his.
Thank you for your patience to our listening audience.
Cut out. What part of it?
You said the report from Aisha that the Prophet, and you need to continue.
Where she was saying, she stated that she was asked about one of the prophets. She said that his character was the Quran walking. He was the Quran walking. That the Quran was his character. So in losing Muhammad, they're losing the Quran as character, as national character, as ethnic character, as economic character, as political character. So you've taken on all of these characteristics that are outside of your moral dignity. And so in a time where people were completely undressed from their human character, it's reasonable to conclude that as a demonstration of the legitimacy of Muhammad the Prophet's leadership, that a people would be connected to that, and that would become their fundamental character, and they would be active for restoring others who had separated from that or separated themselves from that, and may have even a hand in the separation of this other group of people from their human character, that those people who were separated from their human character would be responsible for restoring the moral character. So we have a path that in recent years we have in certain respects been distracted from, and distracted from in the sense that not that I would say that we are not wanting to identify as Muslims. I think that for the most part, our people want to identify as Muslims, but our understanding of that and our appreciation of the fullness in which our Islamic character was shaped had lost on us, and required now is leadership that is disciplined to that and disciplined exclusively to that. And I don't think that it's I think fair-minded person looking at our present circumstances would come to other conclusion I have come to and others have come to as to what that leadership is and what kind of support should be given to it so that we can reach the destiny. And as you stated, I think that the more that we forthrightly we address these concerns, that we will reach some of these, in a sense, latent leadership entities amongst peoples who are wanting to see a more just society, a just order established on the earth. And perhaps in certain respects, they've been cut out of, or maybe not the kind of attention that traditional leadership institutions are receiving, or traditional voices, or voices that have traditionally gotten attention are receiving. I think that as they take a close look at us, that they will be inspired and informed in terms of what their contribution will be to the establishment of a
their contributions
yeah, I think that
to the establishment.
Yeah, their contribution. Okay. Oh, you heard all that.
No. That's where you left off. You said that.
Yeah, I believe that
But
when they, if we're able to hear us more and have access to our voice, the voice of our leadership, it will be a factor for them coming into a better understanding of what their contributions can be and what their contributions will be. To contributions to the establishment of moral.
I could not agree with you more, and I want to say two things in response to that. And one is that I think we will find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator himself, will find ways to put us in spaces where this message will be heard. And I think he will open the pathway for us to place this message of human excellence and human dignity before millions of people in the world. But the second point is, to our earlier conversation, going back to, you referenced it as a teacher for a time, and Councilwoman Bey referenced the fact that young people are getting their information largely from social media. A lot of times that information can be false. It can be mixed in with or tainted with some truth and some falsehood. And so they need a way, a discernment. They need a criterion to help them understand what's happening in the world, particularly since information is moving so quickly, and we have access to the changing norms in society and the actions that are being taken on a regular basis. We look at the war in Iran with the United States and Israel. We look at all of these developments that are happening, and no sooner than they happen do many of us have access, at least to some knowledge about their occurrence. And so the reason that I'm bringing that back into the conversation is that the integrity, the integral role, as you mentioned earlier, that our voice plays in, as you said, we're not supposed to sit on the sidelines. We're not supposed to sit in the confines of a masjid and practice our ritual. That we are preserving not only the Quran, but we're preserving the character of Muhammad the Prophet, prayers and peace be upon him. And I thought that was so beautiful, the way you articulated that. I really think that needs to be shared more widely, that the character of Muhammad, prayers and peace be upon him, it needs to be the character of our economy. It needs to be a character of our form of governance. It needs to be the character of our interaction with our families. It needs to be the character of everything. And so that particularly getting this message, articulating it, and providing a clarity for young people, because they are on the vanguard. You made reference to the fact that young people are they're switching, they're changing their perception of world affairs based upon what they're witnessing. That's coming across their media feeds. Young people in particular, in my field of work, I'm studying Christian Zionism. Young people within the evangelical church are changing their views of unconditional support of Zionism based on, and the state of Israel, based on what is happening and what they're witnessing and what their human souls are responding to. And so we can step into that space of disillusionment, of a response of the human spirit to what they're witnessing. And I believe that we as a community can provide clarity for a lot of young people as they're encountering a kind of stripping away of the veils under which they had operated. And the wisdom that comes with this guided tradition, if you marry that with the youthful vigor, with the energy of a new generation of young people, whether they happen to be African American Muslim and reconstituting the bonds within our community or within our nation or within the global realm, I believe that that integral role, it will not happen without us. I believe that sincerely, and I believe that that's a role that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed us on this earth and within this particular set of circumstances, as Imam Earl Abdul Malik Muhammad has really clarified for us over the past few years from the teachings of Imam Warithuddin Muhammad, that when you take that and you marry that with the vigor of youth, I believe we have a wholesale change that can happen for humanity. And one last point I wanted to mention before we move on is you remarked on the wealth that existed within our community that may not have necessarily manifested itself in great financial resources. But when we went to the convention, when we attended the Ramadan sessions, there was a great wealth that you could tap into, a feeling, a spirit that you can go anywhere and you're standing on truth with the character of Muhammad the Prophet, prayers and peace be upon him, as articulated in the modern age. And that, if we do not correct that and reconstitute that, we have another generation who has missed out on that opportunity. And it is up to us to reconstitute that experience for them and that wealth, because no matter how much financial success they may have, if they don't have that reality, some other idea is going to claim them. Some other reality is going to claim them, and it won't be the one that Allah has designed and designated for our people.
Yeah, it's a concern that I have. I did the math one time. I think we were in, I don't know if we were at Johns Hopkins or Washington University. I believe, I'm pretty sure you were there, and I know that your sister, Dr. Fatima Fanusi, was there. But I remember just sort of sitting there because there was a point in which they were interacting with the students, and I kind of did the math in my head. And it was the first time it had really occurred to me. I said, I'm looking at the age of the students and thinking about, and not all of them were in our community, but the ones in our community that were that age, I said, they probably have no memory, at least, conscious memory of Imam W.D. Muhammad. They would have been very, very, very young, maybe in some cases babies.
Yes.
Far from babies when he passed. And I gave more thought to it, and I thought about myself, and I knew that, we were, obviously you grew up, you're Muslim, you know that there's a Muslim community all over the world, right?
Yes.
Okay. But we weren't socialized in a Muslim country. And in a lot of cases, we weren't socialized necessarily in a Muslim neighborhood, with some rare exceptions.
Mhm.
Our primary socialization as Muslims in this community is associated with gatherings that were there in respect to proper leadership. So it wasn't.
That's a point that requires greater reflection.
Okay, here we go. We had the general awareness that, okay, we're Muslims, we have these particular practices, but that's not what held us to Islamic identity. What held us to Islamic identity was Imam W.D. Muhammad and recognition of his leadership. Because I would venture to say that without those social settings in which there was the social setting, but primarily we were there to hear Imam Muhammad, without that, most of us wouldn't have had much to hold on to in terms of being Muslim. Not in this
Absolutely.
environment in America.
Absolutely.
It wouldn't. It wouldn't have held. And it was him, but also too, because he didn't come into existence on his own. He was the product of something, of
Yes.
a particular history and a particular social movement. So it was identification with that social movement in its completed form as leadership for the world that shaped our Islamic identity. And the thought that future generations are that's not something to be preserved and the continuity maintained for future generations is an offense, a terrible offense to everything that we have experienced as a people, not just as a Muslim American people, but everything that our ancestors experienced, from slave ships all the way up until the present day. So the necessity of continuing and succeeding this leadership as a character for our community is something that we have to become or give more serious attention to and more serious effort to. I believe that was one of the things that we've seen, I think, some very positive signs of, in particular, the invitation that was extended to us in Newark to be a part of the community conversation program, interview program that Imam Mujahideen Muhammad and the Blues there in Newark have. So, these are things that I think are important for us to discuss, and they're important for us to reflect upon in a serious way, and with the intent of acting upon. I am getting a signal that the Imam is ready to join us here, so give me 1 second.
All right.
And
I
we've had
would say
quite
there is not a
yes. And I think too there is an appetite. The Quran makes reference to the day of calamity, and man is crying out. What's wrong with her? The shaking of the earth, the shaking of these power structures. And I think that we see this phenomenon with younger people and their access to social media, but really everyone's access to social media. You're able to see in real time these things happening. In a way that even when we had 24-hour news cycles, news channels, they don't quite match the level. But all this information coming at you, and people are asking, well, what's wrong? How is this happening? What's the solution? They're asking, why is this calamity taking place? And so I think that we have there are answers and solutions that we can offer, so that they're not just overwhelmed. The people aren't just overwhelmed or drowned in the troubles that we're seeing, because that can lead to act too. You're constantly faced with trouble with no solution. Initially, you throw your hands up and you say, well, there's nothing I can do, or that's not my concern. I don't care. I think that perhaps has led to some of the apathy that the council was speaking about earlier.
Yes. And it returns us to the conversation of Joseph and Bilal and the distribution of resources, and not only material resources, but we're talking about ideology, we're talking about hope, we're talking about education, we're talking about distribution of all the factors in the human life that serve the human being and serve a position, as the Muslim knows, that should be one of optimism and trust that the future is bright. But you can't do that without distribution of those resources. So I wholeheartedly
Yeah.
agree with that
And
assessment.
I think that the more that we provide for opportunities like this, it will be a factor for awakening in young people associated with our community, a greater identification with this this particular tradition. I was talking, and this isn't something that uh, well, I guess it's obvious the change, you know,
Mhm.
or the ascribing Islamic identity to particular cultural practices. Not that those cultural practices aren't respecting Islamic disciplines, but a timidity that has crept into a lot of younger men in particular with regard to what constitutes or regard to what their contribution should be to the picture of Muslims in the world. And as opposed to having the confidence to step forward with their own contribution, uh, wanting to disappear in the contribution of others, of other communities. And but I think we're getting to a period where we may be outside of or moving outside of the trouble.
And that's hard.
The Imam joining us in just 1 second, everyone.
All right.
Oh, go ahead, Sister Farah. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. I was just responding to that observation of yours and saying that it reminds me that we are social creatures, because the confidence, as you alluded to earlier, with regard to the wealth that we were able to tap into when we attended these gatherings that shaped and formed our Muslim identity, our Islamic identity, that forms a confidence in you so that you can go out and take whatever natural genius Allah has given you, whether that's, that creative power. You may be a fashion designer. You may just be someone who's stylish, and you start putting something together and other people start to replicate that. But that comes from a community confidence. And it's something that I think that we're building, and I think others in the community are building, and we're tapping into that. And like you said, that this movement in Newark recently, I think, is a good sign toward that recognition of reconciliation and tapping into that character, if you will, of Muhammad the Prophet, prayers and peace be upon him, that should shape and define all of our interactions and all of our engagement. So I'm hopeful
Well,
and heartened that this.
you're an educator from a family of educators, so I'm sure people would be curious that or hear from you with regard to, obviously a lot has happened in our community in the last 5 to 6 years um, with Imam Earl Abdul-Muhammad's leadership. Have you any change in disposition coming from our young people that perhaps more confidence in association with our particular experience and our particular um, contributions in Muslim community?
Absolutely. I'll say two things. One, on the front of the educational institutions, I think this is a response, I think, to the leadership of Imam Earl Abdul Malik Muhammad and what he has emphasized and called our community back to. This guided tradition, that we cannot abandon it, that this is upon which we must stand. And I think there are movements within circles and groups of educators in our community to build or reconstitute, if you will. I'm going to be using that term because I think it's so central to everything that we're doing, but to reconstitute our educational institutions upon the guided tradition. Because in a lot of ways we've fallen away from that. But most importantly, when it comes to the young people, and I'll say that particularly the young people within my sphere of influence, in particular, as an educator, the confidence that you just referenced, the confidence that is embodied in our young people when the proper leadership it emphasizes and puts forward the picture of our community life and essentially what their role is in within the human family. For many years, many of us as educators and anyone who's been an observer of popular culture, we've seen this movement, particularly since the election of Barack Obama. We've seen a pushback from within the African American community against the idea that we haven't made it. We're not living in a post-racial society. I mean, there are different critiques, but some of the most salient are that we need to return to a position of being on the defense, and that we are facing the same types of oppression that our ancestors faced, and that no differentiation that we have made any movement toward the destination, toward the goal together. No movement up from slavery. We're living in the same reality, and we're being as oppressed as our ancestors were. And that is a harmful psychological environment in which young people come up. And that has served, in a sense, for young people to feel as if they are embattled, that the world is against them, that their identity as an African American person is not an asset. It's not evidence of a people who made a covenant with God and who have a creative agency to change their circumstances and to establish themselves. Instead, it's the opposite message, and that's been prevalent in educational institutions and from African Americans. Our books, the most recent books that have been written that are purporting to establish African American identity are some of the most, I think, destructive psychological messaging that you could give to young people. And so into that vacuum, into that dangerous space, and some of it has been promoted by ideologies that even among the Muslim African American community we have embraced, such as the 1619 Project. Not that there aren't some truths in that. Yeah, there's a history there that we all of which we are all aware, but the framing of that history is such that we are in a perpetual mode of oppression and defense, and that we have no agency of our own, and that we have not been, in effect, co-creating this nation with the government and the ideological framework on which it was founded. And so this very victim-oriented narrative has shaped the minds of what you would call Gen Z. It's a very powerful formation into that vacuum that has been accepted even by Muslim African Americans, has stepped the leadership of Imam Earl Abdul Malik Muhammad, which is only elevating the guided tradition that was perfected, in a sense, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the leadership of Imam Warithuddin Muhammad, which is that guided tradition in and of itself is just a modern iteration of the message of Muhammad the Prophet, prayers be and peace be upon him. Not a deviation, but just a modern articulation of that message as a salvation for mankind, as a salvation for humanity. So that message that says that we are co-creators in this nation. We are a brand new people that Allah shaped out of the crucible of American chattel slavery and out of those ideological principles that formed the United States Constitution and our Declaration of Independence. We have been co-creating this nation to bring it to face the promises that it gave. We've been doing that together. Without the African American people, the United States doesn't happen. And it is, as Imam Abdul Malik Muhammad has articulated, the final discussion on whether or not human governance will acknowledge and give its rightful place and supports to human dignity and the human individual. And so that message that our young people are part of that community that calls mankind, calls America back to its best self, gives them a vision of a just order, that you are a soldier in that movement. Oh, that's an identity that has given confidence, has given rise to a great sense of I think not importance, but a sense of mission, a sense of purpose that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to every human being, but in particular has deposited in the Muslim African American and the African American soul in general. So without a doubt, as an educator, as a parent, I see that animating voice, that animating spirit, nothing is more powerful than that as an agent of change for our young people.
Well, that's very pleasing to hear. Sometimes when you and I used to teach, but I'm not a teacher anymore. But sometimes when you're in the work, sometimes you have these questions about, well, are we? And that's been a concern of mine, of wanting to reach younger. I remember how I was affected by things, and so it's always on my mind. How the media environment is constantly changing. Their habits and their way of receiving information is different, even in the way that I received it. So how do we, reach them, and to know that we are reaching them, and that it's having this effect that you've stated, great confidence in the circumstances that have produced them, and circumstances say about Allah's entrusting of responsibilities to them as the member of this group is very, very hard. And I hope that, our listeners who are hearing this can take, there will be a confidence for them to support to the work in which we're engaged, and greater support to the leadership tradition that has never been about a person. Even though there are some very, very powerful personalities associated with it. Um, which we will commit ourselves to continuity for this uh, continuity for this leadership, continuity for really the role of Muhammad the Prophet's leadership in the world. And that's something that is, I think, going to be increasingly part of our national conversation as a community, and some of these peripheral things will disappear. So, the ma'am is trying to log in now. Hold on one second here. Okay, for our listening audience, if you could just be patient with us for one moment while we get a few things adjusted technically.
Okay, how's that?
Yes, sir.
Can you?
We can hear you now.
All right.
Okay, I cut out there. I was just saying that Sister Faridah had some conversation afterward. Um, if you could, if you were able to hear some of it, would you just sort of perhaps give some of your reaction to what was discussed, both with the councilwoman as well as the rest of the conversation?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I wasn't able to hear your discussion, but I do know of the positive works of our council lady in Newark, and obviously she's very important to us, and deserves our full support and our pride.
Yes, sir. One of the things that was perhaps central to the conversation that Sister Farad and I were having was the importance of continuity for our leadership tradition, continuity of our life as a people, and what that means in terms of uh, Islamic leadership in the world, not just for Muslims, but for the world as the globe as a whole, humanity as a whole. And we obviously have some particular challenges that we have gone through in these years after Imam W.D. Muhammad's passing. But I believe that this was part of our discussion, that we've seen some progress in the last few years. And based upon the recent meeting that we had in Newark, New Jersey, what would be your perspective on where we are presently in terms of correcting some of the trouble that we've had since Imam W.D. Muhammad's passing?
Yes, thank you. It's a very, very serious question. And there are a few things that you are pointing to that deserve our attention, require our attention. One is the question of continuity, the importance of that, and I might say the centrality of it as a concern. There are many that identify in our history, and it's in many of them emotional, nostalgic. It's more emotionally driven than it is serious discernment. And when something is emotionally driven without the balance of the rational focus and requirement, it becomes unreasonable and concerns for shortcoming or error in it, in that particular recognition, is washed out by the emotions. And that has been a very serious matter. And in that problem, there's the possibility of a kind of corruption and difficulty in understanding, a veering away from the real emphasis and focus. So it becomes enough to say that the person is identifying with our community in its leadership, in the spirit of our late leaders, without real attention to those teachings, and even a kind of disorientation with regard to even fundamental matters. And Prophet Muhammad, the prayers and the peace be on him, he indicated such would happen to the ummah, conditions with regard to persons not committed to real knowledge and understanding, and for want of a better term, I don't always like to use the term corruption, because corruption suggests a kind of a negative intent. I don't think there's negative intent. I just think that there's something is missing in the constitution of the leadership. And what's missing is understanding and, in some cases, sincerity. Imam W.D. Muhammad himself, he indicated that the leaders in the time when he was interacting with them left a lot to be desired in terms of their understanding and commitment to what he represented. No matter what they claim, he would have been the person to interpret their understanding and their behavior and their emphasis. And he made it known repeatedly, and he did things symbolically, and he did things overtly. And in addition to him identifying those concerns, he also pointed to what he trusted in terms of representation of his leadership. So, if you're a reasonable, thoughtful person and wanting to land in the correct place, you're going to consider all of that honestly, and you're going to come to a conclusion. And you're going to eventually push away from emotional claims or emotionalism and have the proper balance. And in that is a clarification and a kind of purification. And this is a concern for us to address. This is not a concern for persons in Muslim leadership outside of our history. This is something for us to deal with. And over the last several years, we have been working on it very diligently. And we're seeing very, very significant and positive results now.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, Imam.
Sister Faridah.
As a part of the course of that conversation, pointing to two words that you just used just now, you talked about clarification and purification, and you spoke of removing the emotionalism. And this is, clearly a very specific context, speaking to the leadership of the Muslim American community under this guided tradition. But if we might extrapolate from that and extend that principle to the wider, to both our national community and global circumstances, what might we were referencing the clarity that you have injected into global affairs regarding the primacy of human dignity and the sanctity of human life, regarding the conversation America, the United States of America, being the final discussion on the matter of human governance and human society being formed around the ability to promote and protect human life, the human individual, and human innocence. In that light, we extracting emotionalism from the conversation, what clarity might you bring to the kind of the confluence of events that we find ourselves witnessing or observing today? So we're looking at both the distillation of the question of the human potential that is present in the nation that now houses the sacred city of Jerusalem, which represents the potential of humanity and the human sanctity for humanity. And we witness that distilled in the Palestinian question and the Palestinian determination. But of course, we understand that being a distillation of the idea means that we're also discussing Congo, we're discussing Sudan, we're discussing affairs in Russia and Ukraine, we're discussing what's happening in South Africa with the fragmentation of society and the extreme rigidity and repudiation of immigrants that we also find here in the United States of America. What clarity might you help when you're looking at the sensitivities and the emotions of the peoples of humanity around the world? How can you help humanity to see these questions in a way that might minimize the emotional response and help bring them to an understanding of seeing them in the light of human innocence and our common human dignity?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Imam W.D. Muhammad, he visited the occupied territories in the time of the leadership of the chairman Yasser Arafat of the PLO. And in his visit, he repeatedly made reference to his father and his father's leadership. And he did that as a habit when he traveled in the international world. He wanted to make certain that the leadership in the Muslim world understood from where we come, how we have developed, and they certainly studied our development as a people. They knew of Mr. Farad and Mr. Farad's work. And they were critical, this is the Muslim world leadership, critical of us, critical of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And Imam W.D. Muhammad wanted to make known that in spite of their criticism, that he saw it as necessary in the context of our development as a community to make the necessary corrections. And there was encouragement in the teaching of the Nation of Islam to make those corrections. And he wanted to make sure that the Muslim world knew that, at least implicitly, that we have something independent of them, just as they celebrate their own distinctions within the international following of Muhammad the Prophet. We also have something that distinguishes us. So in his reference to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, not that he said this explicitly, but I know what the reference was. The leadership in America would ask the Nation of Islam ministers who were representatives of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's concerns what do you want? What do you want for yourself? What do you want? What do the Muslims want? And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's reply, and his ministers representing him, their reply was the same that you want for yourself. Recognition in society, acknowledgement of the resources of nations, the claim that nations make to their own inherent dignity, and recognition alongside other nations in the context of that dignity. So that particular emphasis has evolved in us, and we have concluded that that really is kind of a signature appeal of our identity as a people, that everything that has happened to us, that is the African American people, and our embrace of Islamic teaching and embrace of Islamic identity, and all of the history that goes along with that as a development and evolution, that it has all been for us to have a crystal clear understanding and a message for mankind in a critical moment of the dignity of man. And if we can appreciate that process and the steps of evolution and the steps of purification, and as you said, the processes of distillation, where your understanding becomes more and more precise, then that means that we have an understanding of something that corrects the troubles and the shortcomings of Muslim world leadership, and also the secular world, in the way that Prophet Muhammad himself, the prayers and peace be on him, addressed the secular world with the guidance of the Quran. So, it might take generations of learned people, scholars, to prove what I'm saying right now. But it will be proven that the time, the circumstances, with a particular emphasis or focus on the issue of the Palestinian people, requisitioned a particular understanding and language environment and reasoning and conclusion, and that our people, the African American people, because of our circumstances, were selected by God and prepared by God to deliver that message to humanity. Prophet Muhammad, when he focused what we now know as the point, the reference point that we're speaking of with the Palestinian people, Jerusalem, he did it sincerely, but with a concern. And Allah acknowledged his concern. It was of a natural concern. He wanted to be aligned with that which he knew to be divine guidance. But there was something there that wasn't satisfactory to him. And that was that one particular people claim an exclusivity to the proper attention for human respect, human dignity. And that was concerning to the Prophet. So he saw that this was an alignment with the tradition of divine guidance, but there was something falling short. And Allah corrected it and showed him that which should be the primary focus. And that is that there is a distinguishing claim on the part of every people, but not to elevate them, but to elevate the central matter. And the central matter is the common dignity, shared dignity of man.
I think it's fitting, and I don't want to monopolize the conversation. I'm sure Imam Ibrahim has plenty of questions for you, but you ended on a note where you said that the central matter, and what that brings to mind is, of course, this essentialism of the idea. A term that Imam Ibrahim used earlier in our conversation was that we are, in fact, integral to this process and this conversation. It brings me back to the central ward and the candidacy of the incumbent Councilwoman Bey, and the larger this piece of the conversation happening in the context of a concern of hers that African Americans in the city of Newark have been seduced by the enemy of man to look at immigrants and others in that city as the enemy, and this claim, if you will, on the resources that are the entitlement of all of humanity, that there seems to be a battle for those resources because the resources have not been, or the economy has not been structured in a manner that those resources can be distributed in a fair and effective manner. So bringing us back to this universal principle and conversation that we're discussing in light of the Palestinian people as a symbol, would you mind discussing that in the context of our local, not just politics, but the state of our communities as they form the foundation for our establishment as a nation? You had a remarkable conversation with the Imam of Masjid Muhammad in Newark recently, Imam Mujahideen Muhammad, and you gave some advice on the role of local imams and their role in building up neighborhoods and building up the community life. And in light of this concern that Councilwoman Bey brought to our attention about an increasing number of African Americans who seem to be seduced by this idea that we're all competing for the same resources and that we are more entitled than, let's say, immigrants because of their national status. What is your advice for those of us who will follow this guided tradition, and particularly local imams, because this is not unique to Newark, but this idea that we need to re-inject into the conversation the idea of human dignity and our shared access as human beings to the resources that are at our disposal.
Mm-hmm. I'm thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we say, according to the teaching of our Prophet, highly glorified is He, highly praised is He, for these opportunities that we have to convey our concerns. There are some competing matters that you have to navigate with a degree of regard and sensitivity for the dignity of people and their hopes for themselves, their plans for themselves, their ambitions. There are ethnic groups that have planned their life in America and are planning their life in America. And they have a philosophy that governs their approach to America. And they have been here for a long time, and they have tested the American environment to see what will be the success of one or another approach. And they've learned how to maneuver um, especially in state and local politics. And because of their learned and tested and sophistication, they are emerging now in national politics. Okay, so they are rising, and and I'm not speaking of one particular group; it's many groups. They have some understanding and experiences with regard to the necessity of economic strength and cooperation within the ethnic group itself to establish an economic base. This has long been a concern in the African American community as well. And our past circumstances and that which has burdened us, our psychology and our spirit, has troubled us with regard to satisfying this concern. Now, there are institutions within the African American community that have been weakened because of an outsized focus on material advancement. And one of those areas is spiritual institutions and spiritual constitution of the people. The general morality of our leadership has suffered, and moral interests, moral strength, moral purity has become a secondary matter, and it has infected our life. We rationalize bad behavior, moral behavior I'm speaking of. And then what I mean by that is not some kind of puritanical idea, but the necessity to maintain a focus on what is correct and good according to what God approves, and to insist upon that, because if you have that discipline, then you can also maintain the discipline necessary to establish strong economic constitution and base. That's necessary. It's like mortar between bricks. You know, it strengthens the structure that you're attempting to build. So society itself, we know, is a setting for a measure of competition, and there has to be moral commitment to satisfy God and to be approved by God. That's our concern. Even if it shows that in one metric that we might be declining, if we're clean before God, eventually we'll be established properly. The competition for resources is a human integral struggle. But what qualifies leadership as approved by God is that there is equity, there is justice, and there has to be a community that represents that concern. Certainly the African American community, and we are Muslims, so we are speaking also of the Muslim African American community. We have to be aggressive and also have an eye on what is just and fair dealing, but be aggressive in the sense that we know that the resources of the earth belong to the servants of God, according to Islamic teaching. We don't have to explain ourselves unnecessarily in our pursuit of the material resources of the earth. We just have to have the mind that every ethnic group has a share and has the disposition to compete. We have to also accept that disposition to compete. In that competition, there's a morality, and there's correctness, and there's an incorrectness. You know, Allah says in the Quran that those who spend not to be extreme and not to be stingy, but find a just standing. That is the group that has satisfied God's standard. And we have to pursue that. And there has to be leadership that explains that principle and stands upon that principle. That will be more a factor for our economic, social stability and progress than any other concern. To stand correctly before God according to the highest standards of excellence, the highest standards of excellence. You know, the Arabs, what has caused them to emerge in the world as a respected body is Islam, the Quran, and the dexterity of the Quran as language to explain the finest and highest principles that govern the life of man. And derived from those teachings in the Quran, the Arabs, they have expressions. And when they say, for example, nice to meet you, the word that they use to express this recognition of one another is ma'aruf, ma'aruf from the Quran, ma'aruf. In other words, there's a high claim and it's known in the nature of all of us. And the extent to which you claim that for yourself and you meet the qualifications, then I acknowledge that for myself as an ambition. And we meet there together. And so therefore, it's my pleasure to know you and to meet you.
That is a most beautiful depiction of both the excellence of leadership and the role that leadership plays, and the standard that you just explained that governs our pursuit of resources and excellence, that mortar which holds the society together. Thank you very much for that thoughtful response.
Praise be to Allah. You know, it's important to say that, and I've said this before, I don't say it emotionally, I say it with knowledge. But it is a spiritual vision in my mind and in my spirit, I'm seeing that I'm sitting in a place that's being judged by our late leaders. And therefore, what I say is in recognition of that commitment to them. I can't violate that. And I don't know that all the leaders that associate with us have that kind of discipline. Now, they might say that they have the discipline of taqwa. Taqwa governs this commitment that I'm referring to. So when I respond, and if I say something or am teaching something or giving some explanation of something, that's in my calculus, you know, to think carefully about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, think carefully about Imam W.D. Muhammad, and understand their commitments and understand that I can't violate those. I can't violate those commitments and make the claim that this leadership continues. I can't secretly or privately say I disagree with this and that, or this or that, with regard to them, or do something that I know that they would look at and say, this is not approved. No possible way for me to do that. So this is why the question for leadership in our community, at least with regard to principle, has been answered. And I say this with humility before God, before the righteous, and with an understanding that what I'm saying is measured by our late leaders in the capacity that they have presently to observe us, that I'm the leader of this community.
Praise be to Allah. Praise be to Allah. We have a few moments left, Brother Imam. You made several reference to the experience of the African American people in sort of a general picture, and we're obviously part of that. And one of the things that we were discussing earlier, Faridah and myself, was this recent and turn in the discourse among African American leaders that has affected, in particular, young people, that our circumstances have not improved in this society, that the conditions that previous generations were afflicted with in terms of America's racial systems of racial oppression and deprivation are still imposing themselves on us, and we are in a perpetual state of victimhood, and the effect that this has on the thinking and disposition of young people in particular. And I remember the first time that I heard something like that, and I was in conversation with another individual who's African American, and I remember being quite offended by it because, my grandfather, he grew up in West Virginia in the 30s and the 40s, and whatever experiences I may have had negatively as an African American pale in comparison to what he either experienced directly or would have been a witness to. And so the notion to me that, I have it, as they may say, as bad as he did, or that the troubles that I've had in that regard are the same as his was insulting to me. But what would you say has precipitated this kind of, I guess you could say, disposition, and what logic is supporting this argument, or what logic are these the people who are advancing this argument? What logic have they bought into that has prompted them to craft this argument and articulate it in a way that it's having an effect on the psychology of our people?
Again, with respect, it's emotionalism. And a kind of defeatism. That's not to say that the visceral rejection of blatant white supremacist emphasis on the part of leadership presently, at least leadership that is in our focus right now. is not a concern and not real. It is real. And there is a legitimacy in our visceral reaction to it. It's disgusting, and it's far beneath our dignity as human beings, and even in the character and the context of American society and its own evolution. It's a disgusting notion that it continues to manifest itself. But you know, it's a reality, and um, if your perspective is to be all the time responding to it, then that captures your spirit, and it encapsulates your potential. But if you recognize it as a component in the moral and human struggle, that you're going to have this kind of immoral opposition, and your perspective is that you belong to God and you're God's servant, and everything that He has promised His servant is available to you, then America can't tell you where you're going to be. America won't be able to calculate where you'll be, because you'll be moving in a way that America depends upon. And that is a serious adjustment in perspective and thinking. But in order to prevail, you have to have that as a focus. And America is a troubled environment, social environment, but it's also a blessed social environment. And what makes it a blessed social environment? It accepted the challenge of testing the possibility that all of the faces of mankind can associate with one another and cooperate with one another for the excellence of society. It embraced that possibility. Well, there has to be leadership for that. The ones who have descended or who have been corrupted by the idea of white supremacy, and they have found spiritual, a spiritual language that marries itself to that and has invaded Christian ethical thinking. We know that that's a spoiling of the American ambition. And we can't descend into it with those people and compete with them on that base level. I'm not interested in that. What we should be interested in is the ahsan, as Allah says in the Quran, ahsani taqween, the excellent mold. God has created us for excellence. And the American environment, it challenges you, it tests you. It doesn't apologize to you for offering you the influence of the shaitan. It doesn't apologize for it. But if you have Islamic discipline and courage, and you say, A'udhu billah minash shaitanir rajim, you recognize that you set aside the influence of the shaitan and what God has promised you is bigger than that, then with your philosophy that is associated with that determination comes leadership and establishment and a new spirit of what America can be and should be. Now, if the majority of the African American people and their leadership can't embrace that, I understand. And we pray for a change in their thinking. But let me tell you, what our commitment is joins with the hope. And when I say our commitment to be the obedient servants of God joins with the pure idea of America. And the pure idea of America is that all humans are created with the same possibilities and potential. and that America commits itself as an environment to support that potential. That is what we embrace. That is what Imam W. Muhammad embraced when he picked up the American flag. And we are determined to exercise in every possible recognition and measure everything that promise invites to. And we are disciplined by behavior and thinking that God approves. So we expect to be successful.
Praise be to Allah. I think that's a great place to end it. Unless Sister Faridah, you have another question.
No, it's a great place. I had an observation, but I'll leave it there. It was, I think it was kind of profoundly tied to your question and the Imam's response. So, but if we're out of time, we'll leave it there.
Again, as always, Brother Imam, thank you for taking the time to be here and to answer these questions and provide the commentary and leadership that you provide.
Great. Thank you.
We are coming up July 11th, our annual Muslim American Independence Day address in the city of Rochester, New York. We are commemorating at once America's birth as a republic, its birth into its commitment, our stated commitment of recognition of what is due all human beings, as well as the voice of Frederick Douglass in condemning America's betrayal of that and his challenge that she live up to that stated commitment. We're commemorating both of these at our Muslim American Independence Day address. Attendance is free and open to all. It will take place at the Memorial Art Gallery, July 11th, there in the city of Rochester, which we know is the historic home of Frederick Douglass. This program, Living in the Most Serious Times, is broadcast or we stream live every second Sunday of the month. You can watch us here on YouTube and other social media platforms. For more information with regard to other activities and programs that we have planned, please visit Muslim American Ministry for Human Salvation. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Peace.